Previous session, Manoj was talking about, he showed some statistics in terms of how websites have been changing, the number of pages have been, getting replaced, digital transformation, all the buzzwords that you need to hear today. But one thing that you can't shy away, and something that I think a lot of people have spoken even before me, is you can't be agile if you're spending your life refactoring tests. How many of you today are just buried, just with a show of hands, where you spend a lot more time maintaining your tests than actually being productive and creating new tests? Okay, so what I'm going to talk today is going to, I think, resonate with almost each and every one of you, right? There are various ways we can address this. So let me give you a quick background of myself. So I'm Ganesh Natarajan. I head the testing services for HCL. I'm based out of San Francisco. I've been doing testing for almost 25 years now. I used to initially work for a company called E-Trade Financials, which was in the financial sector for 15 years. All these, we come up with a lot of fancy names, DevOps, this, that, everything, but behind the scene, it's all about how agile can you be, how fast do you want to be, right? And we used to go into production almost every week, the entire company, and one bug, if it goes into production, you could lose millions of dollars when the market opens, right? I'm now part of HCL software. Let me introduce what HCL software is for a lot of you who don't know, right? So we are not talking about services here. We're going to talk about products and what HCL is doing in that market space. Tied up with IBM, we acquired a lot of their products, some through an IP partnership, some which we own as HCL. And some of the products that we acquired as part of the IP have been rebranded, rechristened as HCL One Test, or is all part of the HCL software, right? So here we're not talking services, it's all about the software. What is the problem that we see in the industry? How are we trying to solve that? I'm joined by my colleague, Ashish. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Ganesh. Hi, my name is Ashish Mathur, and gladly I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, so thanks all for coming again. We've met before, and what we will, like Ganesh said, we are HCL software. I'm just always curious about the audience of how many people know what is HCL software, or the fact that HCL, which is traditionally known as a services company, now does product development. Anybody is familiar with that? Gladly I see a dozen hands go up, so thanks all for that. Well, like Ganesh said, we can't emphasize enough that we are not HCL services. We actually build products, and these are products that are done for all software development life cycle, whether it is even up to, if you know of Lotus Notes, if you've ever used it, that's part of HCL now. So we are a genuinely a HCL software division that is kind of very totally segregated from services. So what we will talk about is our view on what does automation testing mean, and what are the challenges we face. And gladly we are in front of an audience that is very, very well versed in the challenges of doing automation. And I'm hoping that before the end of the session, or before the end of the day, we will get to learn a lot from you guys to see what we should do in our products that make your life better as an automation tester. So having said that, I'll hand it back to Ganesh. Thanks, Ganesh. Yeah.
One of the most popular car, called as the people's car, the Volkswagen, right? It's synonymous with a car that's been garaged all the time, right? You need to start the car, you need to go into the garage, spend your time on the maintenance, and then get it up and running. Our life as automation engineers are also on the same line. We spend hours trying to build, test suites that we think we can run as on demand, but when you have to really run it, there's a lot of maintenance work that you need to do to get that thing going, right? What does it do really, right? Your team satisfaction, right? If you're managing an automation team where you have, your testers constantly under pressure to run and perform those tests, but they're also struggling to keep up with the maintenance, right? It can kill your team satisfaction, right? People want to go out, try to do something different, and you're again stuck with the maintenance aspect of it. You have your changing requirements, right? When we talk about digital transformation, gone are the days when you had a product roadmap. You knew there was one release in a year or maybe two at the most, right? And today we are talking about releases every second. You have your DevOps, you just click, you don't even want QA. Most of the customers I talk to basically say, oh, why do I need QA? I have developers, I have, code that they write, I just want them to test it, get it released into the market. So you have an environment where you have changing requirements. There's a lot of push towards going into DevOps. You want to make sure that from a testing standpoint, you're not steps behind, right? How do you keep up with that? Any of you guys in the audience facing something that you have done different? We want to keep this more interactive so you can share your feedback with us as we keep going.
Especially here in any testing organization, what a typical stigma is that what project are you working on? And the most often very disappointing answer that we get is, I'm working on a maintenance project. I'm working on a product that was created 15 years ago, and I'm having to test that. I run the same test again and again, and it kind of works. So, however, once the application changes, what do you do then? Then you say, oh, it's a maintenance nightmare. I'm going to go start creating all my tests all over again, right? But what I think most of us kind of fail at the point where it's saying, okay, these tests have, now the application has changed. Maybe the application used to be a thick client and now it's a web-based application. But how do we actually modernize our tests? How do we modernize to the point of, you hear buzzwords of AI and ML and all that, right? In my opinion, my personal opinion as a developer, I think they're still buzzwords. But nevertheless, as testers, how can we introduce the kind of testing that we do, the kind of automated tests that we create that will create the satisfaction in us for our jobs that we do as automation testers. We can keep blaming our developers for changing the application all the time, but what as testers are we doing so that our tests are much more intelligent and they can run repeatedly all the time, and even if the application changes, how do the tests adjust themselves, right? That's when we'll get to intelligence in testing. And requirements are going to change with the application. They're going to change all the time. So let's not sit here and say my developer is stupid. He changed a button to one hyperlink or whatever, right? It's going to happen irrespective, because the developer is going to be creative about how they write applications. Now the testers have to get creative. The test tools have to get creative, so that we're not doing the mundane jobs of maintaining anymore. So in subsequent slides we'll talk about what our view on is about how to introduce that intelligence in our tests so that we don't do the manual work anymore. So to the question that Ganesh asked is that, are there ways that you in the audience do where you are able to maintain your tests a little better than having to say, okay, my application has changed, now I go figure out my new XPath again and modify the test and run it again. Do you do something better than that? We would love to hear that from you guys.
How actually our end users are using the applications. Okay. And with those things, we have actually understood which workflows we have to kind of automate on an API level. That was much more important and kind of to be done. Only thing that obviously client always looks at the UI of the application, but for that we kind of kept it on a very specific test cases on a UI to just check it, because maintenance of 50 or 100 test cases is easier than doing the 7,000. So.
Yeah, I think you raise a very good point. When I said maintenance of test cases and guided or auto healing, or we heard the term auto healing before, we heard about Dockers and all that, right? I didn't mean to say UI testing only. You're right, it's across the board. It's whether you're doing UI, you're doing API, you're doing performance, you don't have the services, you're virtualizing it and all that, right? All that auto adjusting itself. You brought up API testing, so I'll harp on that a little bit. Is when you said it affected a lot of your test cases. What did you do? Did you go to the Swagger doc and say the API has changed, it used to be this way before, now it is this way, and hence my test should change and auto-adjust itself?
No, what we did is we have broken our framework in a different way. We have broken our framework in such a way that it caters for workflows which are not directly with the code level. It is kind of an integrated test which we have used.
Okay.
Right. So it doesn't use the UI application UI buttons. For example, I have one button, for example, submit. So instead of using it from my UI, we used it directly on our API level and submit the application and the data on that.
Yeah, so at the development level, if you have, first of all, if you have sonar or something running in the background and you know exactly what's happening, you know the change as it's happening. If your developers are diligent enough to annotate your APIs and those get converted to test, nothing like it, right? Now imagine a situation where the developers are segregated, you know, the class 1 citizens of the world, and then you have testers who have no clue as to how the code was written and have no view. Imagine a developer will not even show his screen to you because you're a tester. I mean, imagine those environments, right? You can't have that. So in those cases, you want the connection where even if you're doing an API test, if your test had the ability to go back and look at the actual API, because it's been defined, right? As long as APIs are defined and exposed, right? Without the actual inner workings of it. Yes. But if the test is able to view it and adjust it, you don't have to do anything, right? Yeah. So I think we see a lot more cases where development is segregated from testing. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, does anybody disagree to that statement? True. Okay, sounds like everybody agrees. So yeah, and like I said, it applies to all phases of testing. Yeah. If you could do it at UI level, it's much more difficult and much more brittle. At API level, it's much more well defined. At performance level, it's probably a little worse. Yeah.
So I think we captured what you said here, right? In terms of when we look at testing and look at test from an automation standpoint, right? You don't want to look at it as one big end-to-end thing. You kind of want to break it up, right? Look at from a microservices layer, right? What is it that you can do at that? And to your point, yes, those are less brittle. You get much quicker turnaround, right? Because you're not going through the entire UI path and all those things, and it's directly interacting with that piece of code. Now, the challenge that we have seen with this in the industry is the skill set, right? Now, not everybody who is able to use, maybe Bangalore is different, maybe this crowd is different, but when I speak more from a global term in terms of the kind of skill sets that you're going to be getting to, right, who can easily do a record, do a UI-based test, but when you talk about an API level test, right, trying to understand what that code is becomes a challenge. But how do we get through to that, right? SDET's one of the things that people keep talking about. How many of you are familiar with the concept of SDET, and you see a lot of pressure in your work organization where they're pushing you towards, becoming one, right? A good number of hands, right? Is it simple to maintain, right? If you are going through with this whole concept of API services, microservices, not going through the front end, right? What kind of challenges do you typically see, right? So we feel that there has to be a tight correlationship between what a developer is doing, right? Some of the challenges that we see is even just forget automation, right? That's, you're just trying to automate what somebody would manually sit there and do. Even the whole structure, the whole construct of testing, right, can be done in multiple ways, right? You have a developer who is there. Every time there is a new feature that's being added, let's say there is a login functionality that's going to be used, it doesn't matter which group in your organization is doing. Let's take Amazon for example, right? Whether you go to Amazon Prime or whether you go to the shopping cart or whether the whole food integration, your login still remains the same, right? So there's a lot of reusability that's brought in, again with the same modularization that's going in. But when you look at it from a testing standpoint, we've seen cases where people write test cases for version 1.0 release. Version 2.0 or any maintenance that keep coming, you have brand new test cases that is being written, right, without going and refactoring those. That results in your automation, right? That's where you get all your brittle test cases. You have a lot of redundant test cases. The reusability is not there. So what we feel as a best practice from a testing is, kind of looking at it from a micro services layer. Now, we cannot ignore the elephant in the room. You guys agree?
Actually, Ganesh, if I may ask my second favorite question is, how many people believe that if I tested at the API level, I'm good to go? Anybody believes that? Because I've heard this very, very commonly whenever I talk, and I talk about all aspects of testing, right? So, but when I'm speaking specifically to UI testing, people say, oh, no, that's very brittle. So I do API testing and my application is good to go. That's good for somebody who is providing APIs for an external consumption, absolutely needed, right? But end of the day, the user experience has to do with the UI, whether you like it or not, right? And what's happening with UI is that there are so many toolkits, so many different ways of doing UI, so many frameworks, so many smart developers that are building UI every day, right? And we, as testers, we have to constantly figure out. 2 days ago, I saw an application with a whole page that has multiple frames in it, and one of the frames is doing cars, which means nobody can get inside that frame without proper authentication, right? So the constant intelligence that is being put into the application, we constantly have to figure out. So what the essence of end-to-end testing is, not its UI, not API, not performance, right? It's end-to-end, it's everything, right? And so UI cannot be ignored. UI changes, UI regression is a reality, and let's get on with it. Let's create ways to say, if the UI application is changing, how are we adjusting to it? So Ganesh, go ahead, please.
So, like how Ashish mentioned, right? So it's something that you cannot ignore. It's very important. Your website, or whether it's your mobile app, right? That's a brand ambassador for your company, right? A lot of people keep even critiquing how easy it is to use or how difficult it is to even get through the navigations and all those things. Gone are the days where you just had, a Windows PC and just one browser, right? Today you can't even keep track of the number of browsers that you have. What works in one version of, Edge might not be supported by an IE or a Firefox and all those things, right? So while it is something that cannot be ignored, but you still need to have a good automation script, it is prone to brittleness, okay? Let's not hide away from that fact. But how do we solve that problem, right? I just don't want to shy away from it. It's not a game where you put 20 people in to kind of do what, if you designed your automation well, you can do that. A lot of time, your API level testing will not work because of the UI layer, which is completely driven by the business, right? There is a business change, there is a marketing campaign that needs to happen. It's a quick deployment that goes in. You don't even have to, do a complete production rollout to get all these changes in. And they can basically kill your tests if you've not accounted for it, right? So even though you have a modularity in, in how you are trying to build your test, you need to focus on a few things in terms of how you are going to make sure that you're not kind of blindly following what's there on the UI, because that's, it's given today that it can be changed. It can be changed based on the user who is trying to log in, right? Each of us have different perspectives that we get when we log into a website. So how do you encounter that and go forward with it?
Ganesh, if I may, just one more thing on the UI. Wouldn't it be exciting if your test automation framework or your testing tool, and because you're running it in a regression scenario, as the application is having daily builds, if you're running that every day, you're kind of seeing the gradual change in the application. Wouldn't it be nice if the testing tool could observe the changes that's happening in the application on a daily basis and auto adjust your scripts, so that you don't make it a maintenance nightmare at the end when you have development has spent 3 sprints and suddenly give you an application that looks no way like it did in 1.0, right? So it actually gives us a very valid opportunity for a UI testing tool to gradually learn the application as it's changing, or to adjust the scripts as they go, so you can focus on the real thing, right? And then also, then leads to my third favorite question is, how many people in the room believe that UI testing and API testing and performance testing are totally different faculties, and that need totally different expertise, and you have to, it's a whole different set of skill set and people that do UI, API and performance. Does everybody believe that? Everybody believes that. Okay. I personally don't believe that at all. I personally absolutely, because I guess because I started as a performance tester, and then I became an API tester, and then became a UI tester, and then I became a developer on all these tools, right? So that's why I say it has become so segregated that you say you start your API testing first because APIs are available, then you start your UI testing because UI is available, and then guess what? It's 14th of August, it's a holiday tomorrow, it's the weekend after, in those 4 days can we finish performance testing, right? That is typically the way we deal with it. However, if you were to start from the beginning, and if with a single test, if you were able to do your functional test, your API test, your performance test all together, all the way from the beginning, you're not surprised at the end that everything was working fine till the end, and now suddenly you put 10 users on the server and the server comes down, right? So that, it starts at the UI or the API level, it starts at the functional level, but with the cognizance that we have to do performance at the end, and that's why if you solve that problem earlier in the stages, then you're solving it for all aspects of testing, right? So that's why I say if the UI tests are robust enough that they are auto-healing in themselves, they're auto-learning the application as it's changing, and if you're able to generate your API or performance test from your golden master, which is your UI test, that would be the perfect way. Then that's when testers will be able to put more intelligence into the testing, cover more test cases, than have to keep changing, the properties or the expats of the test.
It's a good point to get into the next slide, right? And a lot of reasons why people feel that these are separate skill sets, I personally believe they're all tied to tools, right? And I agree with Ashish. If you have a full holistic view in terms of what you're doing, because end of the day, your job is to certify a particular product, right? Or a particular release that goes out. And what we are trying to do here, the next couple of slides you'll see and us talk about, and we have a booth that will talk about how we're kind of making it easy where it's a one-person job and not different segments of our industry. Which again brings us back to, how do you approach, right? You're hearing a lot of terms in the terminologies used. I don't know if it's really an AI or an ML, but those are buzzwords, so everybody wants to have that thing associated with their products. But from where we come from, right? So there are a few aspects of it. One is, yes, there can be some real intelligence built into your product, right? A truly AI-driven product that can help maintain the test cases for you, at minimum identify what's changing, and also you don't have to look for a needle in a haystack, but it's kind of presented to you in terms of what needs to be fixed. There are ways by which you can visually inspect your scripts, maintain it in a much faster way if your system provides those features, right? So what we talk about as self-healing, right? If you are able to rerun those tests, and it's basically saying, okay, you meant click, but that label has got now changed to submit. Is that what you're really talking about, right? Being intuitive enough so you don't have to go and figure out, okay, what happened, and go change the whole code, but you can actually do it at runtime, right? And you also have two styles, right? You have your scriptless and you have your completely coded one. I still believe there is a lot of value if you can do scriptless automation. And at the same time, you still need to have those coded way of doing it, because for all your API things that are going to be, where you need to bring in some level of intelligence into what you're doing. Right? So from a maintenance standpoint, if your framework or if your approach can address these four, then I think you've kind of cut down your downtime, right? And it's all about the ability to cut down that downtime, making sure that your car is not sitting in that shop. It was not meant to be sitting in the shop. It was meant to take you around at any point of time wherever you wanted to go. Now, one of the things that we typically, when we talk about maintenance, right, it's about, yeah, my scripts are failing, and how do I modularize my code and all those things. But there is a much bigger element out there, right, which are environmental factors, right? Let's take a look of what we feel, right? Your applications don't exist in vacuum anymore, right? These are not one-click pony. It's kind of a complete integrated environment. You have repeatable deployments happening. So how do you make sure you're testing against the right version, right? You have your running scripts in the right environment, right? Your configuration, test data management, right? Test data management has been a problem which I will still say it's not completely solved. You have a lot of products out there which talk about different aspects of test data management that they're able to resolve, but the big question still is, can I get repeatable outcome from my tests, right? And what is it that I need to do for that? And the last thing is the third-party dependencies, right? We've kind of gone into that agile environment, each one is a scrum team. The left hand has no clue what the right hand is doing for a large part of it, and hey, it's not my headache, right? It's somebody else's headache, but guess what? It is still impacting how your tests are running, right?
As much as you say somebody else's headache, it is our tester's headache. I mean, no matter what, whether the application runs or not, the blame is on the tester, right? Why didn't you find the defect, right? Developer will be very, very upfront and say, I put that defect in just for you to find it, right? They're that brazen. I'm a developer, so both a developer and tester, right? So I think for us to be able to find the defect that has been cleverly hidden into the software, not to complain about the skill level of the developer, but like I say, I always say it's cleverly hidden, as in even the developer doesn't know, right? So to find that, you will have to put all the environment in place. Now, we just heard about Dockers and Kubernetes the hour before. Absolutely a given. Right? If your test case, if you're still running it on your laptop every day in the same environment, it's not happening, right? You're not ratifying that software. So you need to be able to deploy that into Docker, into Kubernetes, on the cloud, in containers, everywhere, with different kinds of environment, provision, pre-provision, and then running your test cases inside. Absolutely a requirement, right? Now, how much time do we all spend on that? How much do we saw Docker file, we saw the image generation from the Docker file. My question again is, as testers, if we are spending all our time in fixing the Java code in the script, in creating Docker files, generating containers, deploying it on the cloud somewhere, if that's what as testers we're doing, my question to all of us is, who is testing the software? Who is figuring out all the use cases, right? That should be our strength. That's what we should be focusing our time on, and all that should be offload. That should happen automatically. This is, we are in an age where if it's not a click button and all this magic is not happening automatically by tools or by your infrastructure, then we're spending time in the wrong place. So like Ganesh said, it's the variation of the environment, the variation of the data, all that is important to be done right from the beginning, not at the end. Right? Then you have postponed the problem way too long.
See, in fact, I, with my interactions with various customers of ours, right? More and more organizations, when they get into this DevOps and they want to create their own pod and all, QA actually starts reporting into a development manager and not a QA owner, right? Because they don't, they feel that, okay, it's one team, it's one agile scrum team, What happens there is, as far as the development manager is concerned, they really don't care about how much time you're going to be spending or what is the right thing to do. Today, you have, there's so many open source frameworks wherein you can easily deploy your code, right? And the goal is like, how fast can I be in production, right? The moment I say submit, I check in my piece of code. Do I have to wait for an entire build, wait for a couple of days before it goes into production, or can it go there the next second? And when you tell them that, hey, what about the defect, that you're releasing at that pace without giving due respect to the QA work that has to happen, oh, I can put a fix and again send it back, right? It's not those old days where, even getting something out into production used to take time, so they used to value. So we have to be on top of our game. We need to make sure that our tests, we are not blockers in terms of what the business wants, but we're able to kind of be more agile, be able to test smartly, use the right products to enable this faster deployment. This is how we like to call version control in terms of, if you really see what's happening, right, in terms of when a code comes, I love my development guys, okay? That's how I look at what they give. Throw things, over the fence, half-baked, they really don't care. They expect it to be the QA responsibility to kind of make sure even basic validation is done. But if you want your product to kind of run and be completely mature, it does have to go through a rigorous QA cycle, right? I'm not saying it has to be time consuming. I'm saying it has to, you need to, dot all the I's and cross all the T's if you want to make sure you have a proper person, right, or a proper product out there. Multiple ways by which we can support it, making sure that whatever code, everything that we write, automation, you're able to track those. It's kind of repeatable process, and there's a lot of integration that is today available for you to move your code faster.
Right. It's like you said before, the code is changing all the time. In this day and age, if you're saying you're not version controlling your tests, it's not just you that is testing it. You probably have a team of 10, 12 people, and you're sharing your test cases and all that, right? And then you're reusing somebody else's module. All that obviously is a given. The application is changing. That it has come to a point where even the test cases are changing, right? So you want to be version control your test cases, and you want to be able to see just diffing the test cases from before to now. You should be able to tell how your application has changed, right? So I think it's a no-brainer for us today that
How are we on time?
any integration with any version control system in the background is an absolutely must for testing, for successful testing to happen from one release to another.
Okay. So as we started off saying, we are part of the HCL software team. Ashish has been, I can say one of the creators of these products. He's been working on it. Ashish, do you want to kind of wrap it up with?
No, I don't want to bring my 26 years of testing experience into it, but please feel free to meet us at the booth. Whatever we talked about, right? And unfortunately, we've run out of time, but there were my few other favorite questions that I wanted to ask. But please, if you can visit the booth, I would love to have that conversation, primarily from the sense of what we are doing for test maintenance to be much easier, so that what you focus your time on is actually creating intelligent tests. And also, I would like to learn from you as to what are those top 3 things that still bug you as testers that you wish you didn't have to do, right? One of the other things like I asked earlier is your testing phases are so segregated today. Does any UI tester here do performance testing? Do you do that?
So
I
if
see
you don't
2 hands. I see 2 hands, or maybe a few more. How do you transition from being a UI tester to a performance tester? You start all over again? So what do you do? Maybe somebody can speak up and say, what does your UI test look like? Is it a Selenium test or something? And what does your performance test look like? And can you run 10,000, 100,000 users with it?
We don't have like thousands of users logging in there, so it's around, we are talking about 100 user concurrency across 5 tenants. Okay. So as a UI, we are using Selenium with Java to automate. But like to start with the basic performance team, like we have a separate dedicated performance team. But before handing over our code to them in like dedicated performance environment, we use some like load runner, evaluation version or other tools in our local environment to at least have a basic performance test done with 20-50 users before handing over to them, so that we are not getting surprised at the end.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's a good point. There are actually 2 different types of performance testing. One is called the light performance, which is your end user base is going to be 10 or 20 or 100 users at the most on the system. But imagine if you are IRCTC or in any of the big sites, right? That's a famous site. So any of these sites where you go from a typical UI check to say 100,000 or more users, how do you go from there to there? I have not, at least in my experience, I've not heard somebody who say, I can overnight jump from being a UI tester, I've tested the UI, and then tomorrow I'm going to do 100,000 user run. How do you actually migrate from that? So those are some of the problems that we have been trying to tackle for a very long time, and we would love to talk to you about that at the booth. And if you have some ideas, suggestions for us, we would love to hear that. All right, I think that's all we have for now.
That's all we have for time. Thank you
Thank
very
you very much for listening.
Love to talk to you guys in the
Thanks so
booth.
much.